Welcome, everybody, and thank you for joining today's Partner Eco Lunch, where we'll be discussing survey results about the farmOS conservation planning tool. My name is Lishka Arata, and I'm Communications Manager here at Point Blue Conservation Science, and I'm happy to be your host and MC for today's gathering. I think probably most of you are familiar with Point Blue, but being the host, I'll tell you a little bit about the organization if you don't already know. We'll go to the next slide. Right. Okay. So yeah, Point Blue is a conservation nonprofit organization. We have 160 conservation professionals working to conserve birds, other wildlife and ecosystems through science partnership and outreach. And since 1965, when we were founded, we've been using rigorous and collaborative um, science and partnership approaches to track ecosystem health, inform decisions, implement impactful solutions to climate change, habitat loss, and other environmental threats for wildlife and people. And geographically speaking, we're working in California from the Sierra to the sea. And then we're also working throughout the Western Hemisphere from Alaska to Chile on shorebirds and wetlands. And then we work as far as Antarctica, studying Adelie penguins in the Ross Sea. We also have some global partnerships working on global biodiversity policy, which many of us know California is doing a pretty good job at. So yeah, trying to participate on the global stage there. Um, so today in today's meeting, you're going to hear from some awesome folks that are part of a exciting partnership. You're going to be hearing from Point Blue's Director of Soil Research and Conservation. That's Erica Foster. And then you'll also hear from Liat Wild, Point Blue's first ever conservation social scientist. You'll also hear from Greg Ostick and Dan Teravest from RSci, and RSci is a group that supports the development of research capacity in communities through software, hardware, and training. And check out their website. They do a lot of great work. You'll also hear from Aaron Pierce, professor in the Department of Mathematics and Director of the Initiative for Climate Leadership and Resilience at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. So you're going to hear a presentation from all these great folks about this new tool and a survey that was just implemented. And then we'll move into a Q&A and more feedback portion of the presentation. So we're excited to have you all here. We have around 20 participants. That's great. Might have a few other folks joining, and we're excited to hear from you at the end of the presentation. So with that, I'll pass the mic to Erica.
Great. Thanks so much, Lishka, and thanks everyone for joining for our Eco Lunch today. I wanted to start with some context around the partnership, and then I'll give you a layout for the full Eco Lunch. And so essentially this work is a really incredible transdisciplinary research. So we are partnered with the Upper Salinas Las Tablas Resource Conservation District, and they and Cal Poly SLO, Aaron Pierce, and folks at the farmOS have developed this conservation planner tool. And it's really incredible because this includes technology development, it includes conservation scientists, it includes farmers and ranchers directly, planners and technical assistants, as well as overlaying now a business and market exploration side, as well as social science. So you'll hear from most of these components today. And essentially, we started with this design of this farmOS conservation planner software that is community oriented and offering a potential lower cost option. And so this research was really funded through both the UC Office of the President through a climate action seed grant, as well as an 11th hour project as well. And so the context for us at Point Blue starting this work was really focusing with additional research partners on this concept of interoperable data systems for producers. So we ultimately want to get to a place where conservation planning for rangelands and farmlands has a system in which producers can enter their data once and use it for many different many different applications. So whether that's conservation planning or reporting back for grant purposes, or perhaps reporting to buyers, we want to try and streamline data entry and use for producers. And so this was very clear when we were talking to different planners around the state of California and beyond, that there is a need for more efficient conservation planning, and that includes the software and technology component. And so, and I'll just say really briefly that Katie Brown, who's pictured here, is a full stack web developer at Point Blue, and she was really instrumental in linking our original monitoring protocols for conservation practices into this farmOS system. So we had this connection into this whole collaboration before this farmOS conservation planner even. So today the plan is to first go through a demo of the tool itself so you can see exactly what we're talking about here. So I'll hand it over to Erin to do that. And then we're going to dive into our social science with Liat Wild, who will talk about how we designed a survey to reassess and continue assessment of community needs. And then we're going to go through some of the main survey findings that Greg put together for us today. And then finally, looking at the whole landscape of conservation planning tools and how exactly we can create this community tool that's sustainably funded and supported. And so we'll finish up with those marketplace approaches. And then we'll give room for questions for everyone. And then we have a few questions for you all to provide feedback as well. And I see we already had a question about whether or not the survey would be open still. And so we'll discuss that a little bit in terms of how we'll get feedback moving forward too. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it off to Erin to give us a dive into the farmOS Conservation Planner. And I will stop sharing my screen and hand it on over. And Erin is muted. We could get we might want a
Sorry about that. Get
some audio with the visual.
my phone embarrassingly rang earlier, so I put myself on mute to prevent it from happening again. But yeah, thanks for the introduction, Erica. So yeah, so the tool is web-based. You use it through a browser, and when you open it up, it looks like this. This is sort of the main dashboard. This allows you to find projects that already exist. And then you can also use the intake button to create a new project. And so this form is one that either the technical assistance provider would use, or a farmer can or landowner can use this as well. So this just collects a little bit of basic information, name, contact information, some demographics, and then the location of the farm and who owns it, and sort of what the base concerns of the landowner or manager are in terms of like resource concerns, or they're interested in a particular practice or something like this. Then once the that interest form has been completed, and it's designed to take like no more than 2 or 3 minutes tops. You should be able to fill it out very, very quickly and without having to look up any sort of information. So it doesn't ask for parcel numbers or tax ID numbers or any of that sort of stuff. The idea is just to sort of quickly grab people if it's not the technical assistance producer filling it out. So once that's been submitted, then it would appear here in the pending intakes zone. And so then there's a little place where you can review all of the information that's been submitted. And again, a bunch of this is optional, so like you don't have to submit acreage and so on and so forth. And then you can assign it to a staff member to take care of. And then it would pass from pending intakes over into active plans. And so then once whoever it's been assigned to gets that notification that they have an active plan waiting for them, they can go into the plan. And then there's a number of these accordion boxes that expand out, and it basically pulls you through the process of setting up the plan. So the property description has a little bit more information. This is something that the technical assistance provider could fill out before actually doing a site visit to some extent. There's a built-in QGIS interface where you can add boundaries of regions or other structures with spatial data, um, parcel numbers, etc. And then after you save that information, it takes you to land use areas. And so for this, you can designate different regions or subregions of the area that you're assessing. Um, so for example, let's see where, okay, so this is the native plant nursery and facilities, which is actually this little barn. So just for scale here, there's where to go? There it is. So this is a large pole barn, and then this is a newer facility that doesn't show up on the satellite photo yet. And so as you add things, it will calculate for you linear feet or area, depending on what sort of polygon you've got going on. Um, and so you can classify the type of zone that you're talking about, add information, basic information about it, so on and so forth. And so there's a number of these already set up. There's an oak woodland, and there's a dry farmed citrus orchard, and so forth. And so um, after you've added a number of land use areas, then they become available as places that you can provide an assessment for. And so then this is when you would actually do the site visit, and you can go out and make notes about uh, the various different parts of the land. This particular site was a donkey sanctuary for for a decade or so, um, for what it's worth. Um, and then you can also describe information about like the watersheds, wildlife, concerns there might be about particular like soil conditions. You can rate things, make notes, so on and so forth. And then let's see. So then you can go on to conservation practices and suggest potential interventions for each of those different places. So here we've suggested, so for the orchard, you might put down cover crops, and you might do like a compost or biochar application. And then for these, there's associated data about, like the size, when you're doing it. This information is auto-populated from NRCS CPS practices. There's something about status. And I should mention, the software is fully functional and usable for the functions that we have built in so far, but it is still under development. I would say it's beta or maybe late beta. We do have one RCD that's using it as their platform for planning. And there's a couple others that are experimenting with it, but have not yet, officially adopted it as their base platform. Um, so there are some things that are going to be added. And so we plan to add a couple things to the GIS interface, as some other automations there, as well as more details about like just how much of what region is in what status. So tracking things like that with a little bit finer detail. And also if there's funding for particular practices, and if so, how much has been used and on what acreage, and details like that. So that's sort of things to come down the road. We have a a fair list or backlog developed of features that we have yet to add in. Um, and then this is where you can prepare the report. So you can generate a document from the template, and then all of the information that you've put in so far is now put into some doc file. And this can be downloaded, it can be edited directly. And then if you want to make changes to it, you can upload that document back into the system to keep it here as sort of like as a repository and see old versions and so on and so forth. One of the things that's forthcoming is the ability to, instead of provide a static document to the landowner, um, provide them with a login to this exact file right here so that they can provide their own data, update things, move information back and forth. So if there's, a grant proposal process going forward, then there's a place where they can, upload a file or put data in to collect it that way. The multi-tenant farmOS module has been developed. We just finished construction of that. It just has not been implemented yet in farmOS Conservation Planner to allow for that. And you can email the document to folks in your group. And yeah, there's another place where you can attach general files that are associated with the process or add comments. And that's basically it. Once these things are all developed, then you can see here this is the main resource conservation profile for the property. And then there's various practices like the dry farm citrus that comes with its own little practice implementation plan that you can view and also edit and update through this interface. Yeah, and so the one of the uses of this tool is that it allows you to collect information about a whole bunch of potential shovel-ready projects all in one place, so that if you're doing grant applications, you can see kind of like, okay, in our region, this is the total number of acres that are waiting for compost or something like that, and so you have those statistics ready at your fingertips, and the data can be exported from this into a Google Doc so that you can look at it in whatever format you like, sorting via tables and all that sort of stuff. And I think that's about it. Oh, I guess one other thing is, yeah, so for putting in information about carbon impacts, the workflow is just sort of the rather kludgy go to Comet, do a calculation, and then come back with the data and enter it here. There's also a tool coming out from CSU Chico called Regen Ag Planner, which is more focused on like what is the feasibility and potential carbon impact of these practices in this particular location. So it's a complementary tool. There's a slight overlap, but not actually much of one with the current tool, as I understand it. I'm not the expert there. But I'm hopeful that we can perhaps get something going with an API with that tool to allow for smooth data transfer. So um, that's it for now. I can answer questions, I guess, at the end. So.
Thanks, Aaron. And I should mention also that we're going chronologically today. So we had the tool was in development, and then we received this additional funding source to overlay a community needs assessment to really formalize that. So it started with conversations with conservation planners that Aaron had in his region of California. And then we've expanded to include feedback from folks across the nation. And so really Point Blue's role was project management. And next we'll hear from Liat, who really brought expertise into this project around the survey design.
Thanks, Erica, and thanks, Aaron, for the overview of the tool. Yeah, so as I got involved with this project, my role was to kind of help formalize all the different input from various users. And so what I'm going to talk about briefly is participatory design as a concept. So what does it mean to do this systematically? And so the origins of participatory design are in the 1970s in Scandinavian countries when all of a sudden technology development companies were realizing that their workforces would have a lot to contribute to the development of new innovations and new technologies. So design studies is a subfield within the social sciences that thinks very critically and intentionally about the ways that different diverse stakeholders should be involved in a design process. And that's to design different types of innovations, whether it's technology, various programs, but it's thinking through that very intentionally. So in general, the elements of participatory design are inclusion and collaboration. So that means like, are we actually getting at diverse stakeholders, all the people who need to be at the table? Iterative knowledge exchange. So that's what you see this like circle, something that's very important to the participatory design process is that it's iterative. We heard from Aaron like about lots of different feedback that's already contributed into the tool and forthcoming features that are from more feedback. And so it's very important in participatory design that the innovation design process is iterative and that it adapts and changes over time. Another key element is empowerment to influence the design. So that's that like users are actually seeing their desires, their feature wishes come to fruition in the tool, and contextual understanding, which is gathering lots of information about the context in which the innovation will be used. And so that is what, Erica, you can go to the next slide. That's what we intended to do with the user survey and also some other social science methods such as stakeholder interviews, a competitor analysis, to bring all of these different social science methods together to iteratively understand how we can keep incorporating user perspectives into the design of this tool. And so with the user survey, which is what we'll focus on in the second half of this presentation, was about really understanding that necessary context. So it's not just like, you know, a wish list of what do you want to see in this tool, but rather understanding the hurdles, the workflows, the values of conservation planners. So beyond just like what do you want the tool to look like? What is your work like and what do you care about? Something that came out of the survey that really stood out to me was the relationship management component and just like how core that is to people, the folks who filled out the survey, their work in conservation planning. And that might not be something that you would immediately think of when you think of like software development, but it's clearly a very core part of the work. So how can we incorporate that? And so that's what we've been doing over the last couple months is implementing the survey, which many of you filled out, and thank you so much for doing that. Talking about your responses, talking about them in relationship to data we were hearing from folks who participated in interviews with members of our team, and discussing that from various different perspectives so that those of us presenting today have very different backgrounds. We were laughing before this about how Aaron's a mathematician and I'm a social scientist, and we have tech folks and a soil director. So like, what do all these people have in common? And that's another very important part to this iterative design, participatory design process, is bringing lots of those different perspectives and applying those perspectives onto what we're seeing so that we really shape a tool that is for the people who will be using it. So I will pass it off to Greg, I think.
Yep, thanks. So I'm just going to walk through the results of the survey and some information about it briefly. So we had 51 respondents. It was a pretty brief survey. I would say, 3 to maybe 2 to 7 minutes, 7 minutes if you were really thorough. We had 51 respondents. Many of them had multiple roles. That's why this sums to more than 51. But mostly they were either technical service providers. You can see we had quite a few of those, 22. Conservation planners, we had about 14. Those are the biggest groups. And then we had other folks who were neither of those things. A lot of people were multiple things, but some people were neither. So that's our other group. So that gives you just a sense. Most folks were in California because that's where we had the most responses. So yeah, those are the folks who responded. And so we were really asking questions to try to understand what people were using today, their experience with the software or sometimes not software that they were using to do this work, what was good, what was bad, and if they had willingness or interest or capability to try something new. So you can go to the next slide. So of those folks, one of the questions we asked was what tools do they use now? And if you look in the upper right, you can see dark green are the technical service providers. Light green is conservation planners, and then the other color is other. So I think what's interesting to point out here is what tools do they use? Excel, Word, and Google Earth dominate, right? Like especially among TSPs, but really among everyone. Those are still the primary tools that are used, even though there are actually custom pieces of software out there that do these things. That's still what most people are using. I also found it interesting that QGIS, which is an open source platform, was pretty widely used by TSPs also. That takes a little bit of, fooling around to get to work. So that tells you a little something about TSPs, I think. Next slide. This is too big to understand, but the question is, how do tools compare? And on the top of this is a whole bunch of different tools. So I will just tell you what it is since it's hard to read, but things like Airtable and Conservation Desktop and SeaBrain, which is a tool that they had used before some RCDs had used. FarmRaise, Survey123. So a range of tools. And then on the left-hand side is a range of functions. And these are the functions that Conservation Desktop can do. So simple things like drawing property and field boundaries, uploading maps, having an API that allows you to export your data, having printable forms, that kind of stuff. So we're not going to go through all this, obviously, but the point is that there really isn't anything out there that does all this stuff. That's really the short of it. And I think that's why you're seeing a lot of people use Excel and Word, because they're flexible enough where you can kind of figure it out. But yeah, functionality is not covered right now is the short of it. And the next one. So now we asked, what do they want to prioritize? So if they were going to use something else or for the functions they needed, what was most important? I thought this was really interesting because you had pretty different answers between the groups. It's small numbers, but still. Again, same, we have TSPs, planners, and others. And if you look at that first red circle, TSPs really want collaboration. And they actually did provide some narrative feedback. And most of what that collaboration is they want to prioritize providing good information back to the farmer, right? I need a good report that looks nice to go back to the farmer. So that's really important for them. Low cost was important, but not critical. A lot of them are already paying for software, especially TSPs. And then everybody needs GIS and mapping, and that's probably the biggest hole right now is Excel and Word are great, but they don't have GIS and mapping in any meaningful integrated way. Next one. This is just a really simple slide. Basically, conservation planners marginally like Conservation Desktop, but TSPs hate it. That's really all this says. And most TSPs don't have access to it, as you know, but the ones that do not like it, and that's probably because there's a lot of rigmarole in getting into it. But I think that tells you that TSPs are particularly underserved because even the custom software that would typically be used for this kind of thing is either unavailable or not serving them well. To the next one. So then we're almost the last slide here is how big is this market then? So we took some of this information, the feedback that we got, and tried to figure out, well, how many TSPs are there in the world? How many conservation districts are there? How many people who do other types of similar land planning, like land trusts or extension consultants, are there? And there's a lot, but of course, they're not all going to use this tool for many reasons. So we said, all right, let's just look at California RCDs, some interested TSPs from the survey. And if we can get some state level Conservation Association pilots going, what if that was the obtainable market here? It's not small, it's 600 users potentially across 150 organizations. And I don't know what the pricing structure would be. There's some costs associated with this. We don't even know how people would pay for it, but this just gives you a ballpark of what the potential revenue is. That matters, not because somebody's trying to make a bunch of money, but because somebody has to maintain and develop the software and make the features really awesome. So you have to ask the question, is this a big enough market to sustain the thing that we all want to sustain? And hopefully the answer, I think, here is, yeah, I think on a minimum, yes. So then last one. So takeaways from our survey, and also a lot of interviews, by the way, beyond the survey, is that the demand for this tool is real. I think the RCDs that we talked to in particular experience that. There's a willingness to try, there's clear pain points, and there is a history of people paying for software, which in some markets there's not. The market is large enough to support basic feature development costs. TSPs seem like the most interested party because they're the least served right now. The main competition is not other custom software, but it's Word, Excel, ArcGIS, and Google Earth, which I think is kind of interesting in of itself. And we didn't go through this, but the feature details really, really matter. Like people like, I will use it if it has this very specific exact thing. So it really does matter to get the details right. And I think Aaron and Mike and that whole team did an awesome job of working through those and really nailing it down. So that's the market segment. So I'll pass it off to Dan.
All right. Thanks, Greg. Yeah, I want to build off something that Greg just said, which is he said someone has to sustain the software. And so a key piece of the work that we were doing is doing research, understanding the landscape and saying, okay, what would that look like? Right. It's one thing if there is an existing profit motivated organization that wants to run with it and turn it into a business. Or maybe if you have one large institutional super user who says, we're going to build this into our core infrastructure. And so the tool is supported kind of already by default for the long term. But right now, farmOS Conservation Planner doesn't really have either of those. So the question is, how do we identify a plan so that we can have that sustainability? Because the unfortunate reality is there are many examples within the open source, kind of technology co-development space where, really cool, impactful, useful tools have been created, but because they didn't get to that financial sustainability, they fade away. And then now when you have a tool like the Conservation Planner that's in front of us, users may be very hesitant to say, I don't want to jump in. I don't want to use this tool because I'm worried it's not going to be sustained and maintained 6 months, 12 months, 24 months from now. So really getting that, who is maintaining it and how are they going to maintain it in the long term? Those are really important questions. So what we did first was we looked at the market, right? Greg just showed that. Good news, a market exists. Cool. Let's build off of that. The next thing is to really look at who is already invested in the tool and interested. And so there's some really specific, I think, characteristics that have popped out through the surveys, the interviews, and interactions. The first is that the community is used to collaboration. Right? They're used to getting together, writing grants together, doing projects together, and scaling implementations together. So people who are in the room are used to being in the room with other people. That's great. Greg mentioned that people are willing to pay. That's true, but a lot of groups like RCDs and others, they can pay, but they can't pay a lot. So that difference between a software as a service marked up to make a profit for a company versus maintained with a nonprofit, kind of tier that allows you to pay, but at a lower rate, like probably not too many of those. We can pay that SaaS, cost point. So that's an issue. One that I'm sure is true of pretty much everybody who's on the call right now is that the community is mostly impact driven, right? Conservation planners are not sitting there thinking, I want to build a software tool that every state in the country uses. No, they want to build a tool that helps them do their work to have positive outcomes with the farmers who are their stakeholders, right? The same is true for the farmOS community. Their goal is to build features and modules and tools for the public good. That's the core. That's why they do what they do. They're not thinking about commercializing a product. So when we think about all of these different factors, there's a market, but people can't pay a lot. There's a community, but there's no one person in this community that's like profit driven to drive it. What do we do? Next slide, please. So one of the key things that we did was we went and looked at a lot of successful open source tools that exist. Greg mentioned QGIS. It's a great example. It's got, tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of monthly users. But it's free to use. But it brings in hundreds of thousands of dollars in revenue every year. It continues to build out features and have a very robust user base and support. Kobo Toolbox is an offshoot of Open Data Kit, which is like a data collection tool used a lot in the global south for data collection. But then like Kobo Toolbox has really been built into the infrastructure of like UNHCR has one of their core tools that they build around. So it always has support. Drupal is what farmOS is built on, right? So this idea of building modular open source tools that are customizable to different groups. So looking at all of those, there's 3 pathways to getting to that financial sustainability. One of them, the most likely way to kind of organize it is to have some kind of tiered membership model. And it would be up to the community itself to decide how formal or informal they want to make that membership model. But the basic idea is the core users who are incentivized to support the tool in the long run, they pay membership dues, right? Those dues provide those members with decision-making power, access to the tool. That tool access is going to be tiered. You have different price points based on, how many users or how many instances they want to engage with, and they're going to get training and support. The tool itself, so the software would get core hosting, core maintenance, bug fixes. You're probably not going to generate enough, revenue through membership dues to accelerate software development, but you can maintain the core. And then the community, through that structure, can get kind of a management and governance structure. And then if they choose, they can go out and try to hire for the pieces that they don't want to do themselves, right? People in California don't want to do marketing to conservation districts in Missouri. So they're not the right people to do the marketing and outreach. So you can use that group structure to hire for those needs, and they can then take the role in being, the salesman or the marketing or the communications expert. Once you have kind of this group available, now you can think about things like grants, so Cal Poly, Point Blue, right? The other members of this group have all successfully, continue to successfully get and manage grants. So it's very normal for them to do it. And as you bring more and more people together, the potential scale of impact for grants around accelerating software development can get greater and make grant applications more competitive. So that's one way to accelerate that development. And then there's the option of identifying adjacent services. And this is just where can we find additional secondary value to continue to support the tool or the community or however you want to structure it. One of a common one is pay for feature fundraising. Like you identify a feature everybody wants, you put it basically on GoFundMe. People who want that tool built, they donate to it, and then that tool gets built, and then you can do it with the next tool, and you can kind of iteratively build out over time. You can offer hosting services for external users who don't want to be a part of the group, but still want to use the tool, right? And you can use that as a revenue source. You can do, offer training programs or certifications or other support services. So like once you kind of build out this kind of structure and community, you can start identifying different ways in which the community can support itself, reach that financial sustainability so the tool can grow and people using it can have comfort that it's going to be there for the long run. I will turn it over to you here, Erica.
Thank you, Dan. So I just want to finish up really quick before we open up for some feedback and discussions, just on ways you can stay connected with the effort. So we do have a new conservation planner listserv where we'll be putting out updates around ways to give feedback, and also if there's different tool features that have emerged. And you are also welcome to join the farmOS community. We have a tag specifically for farmOS Conservation Planner, so you can join the forum there for updates and different conferences that folks will be at to continue the discussion. And I just want to say that overall, we kind of dove straight into technical details and the market analysis today. And I think what's really important here that's emerged is through this multidisciplinary approach, we're able to find all these organizations and folks with different backgrounds that are really values aligned, and finding a way that we can support those values and the community around this in a sustainable way is pivotal to the success of of the streamlining the conservation practices and really having an impact that is aligned with those values. So I just want to give a big thank you to everyone who contributed to this project. It really is community driven, and that's been really exciting to see that moving forward, and I'm excited to see where it goes next also. So